Welcome back to the Arctic Beyond. I'm your host Jack Ball, and it's the channel where we talk about everything about the Arctic and maybe even a little bit beyond. Now, most of the news that comes out of the Arctic tends to be pretty serious, doesn't it? If you've been watching this channel or even just keeping up with the occasional bit of news, it's rare that you get something from the Arctic that really makes you feel a whole lot of good.
Of course I'm happy.
So I thought I'd make a bit of a change. So rather than covering the typical things like climate change, like pollution, like finding out that there's loads of bees hidden in the snow, that's true actually. There's loads of bees hidden in the snow. So in Alaska alone, there's over 100 different species of bees. Most of them are solitary, they live in the ground, and none of them make any honey whatsoever. Now, I'll be honest, that's the life. Just living alone in the ground and not making anything for anyone, just living your own life and doing your own thing without producing anything of worth. Oh, I'll be honest, that sounds like a dream right there.
But I do nothing every day.
But instead of covering those more serious stories, I wanted to share with you some of the more unusual stories that I've come across while I've been really studying the Arctic. Let's kick things off with polar bears, my personal favourite animal. The thing which really got me into the Arctic in the first place was polar bears, so if I can find a way to start anything with polar bears, I'm starting with polar bears. You know about them, they're the most huggable killing machines outside of a furry convention. I've talked about polar bears before, and I've even touched on this very topic in the past. We're talking, of course, about polar bear hybrids.
He's one of these hybrids, huh?
Now, these are polar bears that have bred with grizzly bears. These polar bears and grizzly bears have met somewhere in the wilds, in a place where they wouldn't normally meet, and they've engaged in what can best be described as a true catastrophe for the eyes. And it's the offspring of this unholy coupling.
If we're going to go back in time to that unholy coupling, then I have a medical obligation to drink.
That is the topic of this subject. Now, they're either called Grolar or Pizzly bears. Just a quick review of those names. Grolar sounds like a black market medication to give you erections that are twice as big as normal and are also somehow a great source of calcium. And Pizzly sounds like one of those really cheap, horrible fizzy alcohols that have two target demographics: teenagers in the park looking for alcohol poisoning, and hen parties looking for alcohol poisoning. Either way, both sound like D-tier Pokemon, 6 out of 10. There's actually been a lot of study and concern surrounding the Grolar bears since they were first discovered back in 2006. A weird-looking bear was found, and scientists immediately took some DNA samples. Can you imagine that? Can you imagine being so weird-looking that scientists immediately descend upon you and take you away for testing? And then it even turns out that they're right, that you are some weird hybrid that should not exist.
Wow, it is so weird.
Now, the concern about the bear hybrids, it's because, well, the Arctic is melting. The habitat for polar bears is disappearing, and it's not coming back anytime soon, it seems. This is forcing polar bears to move south into grizzly bear habitat, and so the presence of these hybrids really is just the logical conclusion of the two species coming into contact and eventually breeding together. The hybrids that they are breeding as well, they are viable offspring. Now, what we mean about viable offspring, it means that they are fertile.
Yeah, I'm gonna give you so many babies.
Listen, we all do crazy things when we're horny, right? I mean, no judgment, okay? But normally, if they do happen to create some kind of weird, disturbing love child, that offspring in itself is not able to create further offspring. Polar bears and the grizzly bears, their genetics are still close enough to be able to create viable offspring that can further breed. So the question does persist, and what the concern has been about is how big of the threat is the Grolar bear to the grizzly and polar bear species.
What's the threat?
As it turns out, it's not a disaster, it's not even close to a disaster. It's one of these confusions that only the male-dominated scientific fields could make. This isn't in fact some kind of catastrophe that could spell doom.
I think it's the apocalypse. What?
It's actually just a woman living her best life. You see, there are 8 known Grolar bears. And so scientists have been able to track down these Grolar bears, get their DNA, analyse them, figure out where they have come from. In conclusion, they found all these Grolar bears, they're coming from one freaky polar bear lady. She just like some grizzly.
You know, there are some hairy men that I find attractive.
And you know what? You go get it, girl. You show those grizzly bears how they do it at the North Pole. This absolute queen of a polar bear is living an absolutely world-class life. She's a keen traveller, she's meeting foreign men with what I can assume is very cute accents. She's got at least 8 kids and grandkids, but she's not letting that stop her living her own life. And her very existence has been confusing the hell out of an entire field of science for at least 20 years, you absolute legend.
Go get it, girl.
Now, while we're talking about bears being nothing but delightful scamps, you might have seen this story back in November.
Here's the best thing we've seen today: bears that clearly have a sweet tooth. When an opportunity presented itself, this family rolled with it. A Krispy Kreme driver was recently making a delivery in Alaska, but he encountered some unexpected customers. You see, a mama bear and her cubs who made their way onto his truck made themselves quite at home, chowing down on donuts. Aww. After the snack, the bears took off into the woods. So there you go. Best thing we've seen all day.
That's a good mama bear right there.
That's right.
If you didn't know about this before, a mother and a cub black bear in Alaska broke into a Krispy Kreme truck on a military base. Now that in itself raises numerous alarm bells. That military bases, even in remote Alaska, get Krispy Kreme deliveries is somehow equally worrying and impressive from the US military. And yet bears can break in and out of these military bases without really any trouble. Note to any future invasion forces, large mammals can get access into military bases as long as they have a steady supply of donuts.
Now, I love donuts, but I hate the paperwork.
The full story is that the driver stops to make a delivery to the on-site convenience store. Normally when he makes these deliveries, he would always just leave his van's doors open. Again, some security concerns there, my friend. The bear has been well known for hanging around the base in the past, but had never gone full Ocean's 11 on the donut van before. While we're here, I think it's only fair that we assign each of the Ocean's crew their own bear species. Danny Ocean, the coolest of the crew, and a silver fox to boot, polar bear, easy. Linus Caldwell, the young upstart who's also a crafty thief? Well, after what we've heard today, gotta be the black bear. Basha Tar, an unintelligible accent with a penchant for blowing things up, that kind of chaos, it's gotta be the Grolar bear. Frank Catton, the inside man, has to be at home among the enemy, gotta be a sloth bear. Rusty Ryan, Brad Pitt, he's a bit plain, but he's everywhere and we love him. It's a brown bear. Turk Malloy, the big one of the bunch, it's a grizzly. Virgil Malloy, seeing he's so closely related to the grizzly bear but is smaller, it's another brown bear. Ruben Tishkoff, flamboyant but with a nasty streak, definitely the panda. Livingston Dell, it's the tech guy, oh it's the spectacled bear. Saul Bloom, a smooth fashion sense, has to go to the bear with the consistently best drip. It's going to the sun bear. And lastly, Yen, the token Asian character, gets the token Asian named bear species. It's the Asiatic black bear.
A lot of bear in this area?
So the bear in Alaska. The driver left his van doors open, the mother and the cub make their move. The bears were in the van for 20 minutes. The van driver and the store manager were reportedly banging on the sides of the van trying to scare them away, but these bears were in a real flow state inside and nothing could get them away. Yet, I wouldn't move either. If I was at a free, gourmet, all-you-can-eat donut buffet, nothing could get me out of there. You'd need a SWAT team with a federal injunction to get me away from that heavenly van. The store manager herself said, and I quote, "I was beating on the van and they're not moving. I could hear them breaking open the packages and everything." She said, "I was like, they don't even care." I love everything about this story. After a while of banging and shouting, the military base had to sound its alarms to try and up the ante to get the bears to get out of there. After the alarms didn't do anything, the base had to call its security to attempt to scare the bears away as well. None of this worked. The banging, the alarms, the security patrol, who I can assume, let's be honest, is military soldiers, military police, came. Nothing could get these bears out of the donut van. And let's be honest, this does sound like a pretty irresponsible use of military resources for a military base that borders on Russia. In the case of Boy Who Cried World War III, it's entirely possible that a base in Alaska will sound the first alarms, but instead of a proportional military response, instead a fleet of Krispy Kreme trucks will come hurtling up to Alaska to try and retrieve their fallen merchandise. After all this, the bears eventually just decided they had their fill. The mother and the cub left the van, sauntered into the woods and haven't been seen much since. The only thing stopping a bear in Alaska eating all of your donuts? Stock enough donuts that it just can't eat them all.
Oh, I'm so full. Thank you.
But just as weird as the bears of the Arctic are the people that choose to live there. Those glorious people which chose to live in an area which can charitably be called murderous. And in Norway, the country that resembles the kind of shriveled penis you get if you ever tried to take a pee outside in the Arctic, the town of Vadsø had a pretty interesting idea in April this year. What if our town had a 26-hour day? Now, before we go any further, I do need to tell you, they didn't even think this through themselves. The mayor of Vadsø wrote to the European Commission to ask it to create its own time zone, which is a 26-hour day.
What time zone is this?
The mayor herself, Wenche Pedersen, was asked by Politico how exactly she would enact this plan, and her response was pretty blunt. "We haven't thought a lot about that," she said. "The clock will go from 12 to 13, and then we'll have to see how this will go." I don't think they're going to say yes, so we haven't thought about all the details. Fun! Mayor Pedersen says that she wants to create a new, better way of life in the town. She wants people to be able to allocate more time to fun and social activities every day, which is definitely a really noble thing to want for your townspeople. But let's have a think about why this won't work, shall we?
It just won't work on me, and I'll tell you why. It's because I am a pimp!
First of all, she asked the wrong people. Time zones are actually set by the individual countries themselves, not an overarching entity like the European Commission. Secondly, Norway isn't actually in the EU, so the European Commission has less power in Norway than it does in other countries, but it can't even in other countries enact time zones like it was asking them to do. My first recommendation then would be next time, write to the right people. But 26-hour days. So we're keeping the halves of each day even. So in other words, it does get to 12, then it gets to 13, and then it goes back to 1 after that. The real problem is that every single day, the town gets out of sync by 2 hours with everywhere else in Norway, everywhere else in the world. And more crucially than getting out of sync with the rest of the world, it gets out of sync with the sun. You see, time isn't just some human construct that someone likes to tell you after they're 4 hours late to your wedding, then they give you the excuse that, well, time is just a prism, bro. Remember, noon happens when the sun is at its highest. So on day 2 of this experiment, the sun is actually here now. On day 3, it's here. On day 4, it's here. On day 5, you see where this is going. And on day 6, it's right down here. Where am I pointing?
Don't point that thing at me, Tribbiani.
So if you have working or school hours, either those are having to change every single day, or in fact you are now getting up at a different time but the same time every day, and eventually you're getting up at night but it's still the morning to get up for work or school or whatever. I don't think this is going to work. And I guess the rebuttal for that could be that the town of Vadsø, seeing it is in the Norwegian Arctic, it does have those long summers and winters. So in those times, effectively it isn't, the daylight hours aren't changing so much, but that almost makes it more confusing. If you ever spent time in those kind of areas, you need something as concrete as genuine time to live your life on. When it's 24-hour daylight especially, it gets really confusing when you're up in that area. And if the time is changing every single day, it would get really, really confusing. Now, Mayor Pedersen, when she was speaking to the Polar Journal, did eventually reveal that this was never really intended to be something they would actually do, and it was all just a publicity stunt, trying to communicate to the world that this town of Vadsø is somewhere where you can take your time, where there's all the time in the world to do the things you love. And it's not really for tourism, it's to try and get people to move there, to live and work there. That's really the purpose of it. Except that's not really the message she was actually giving. What seemed to be she was actually saying was people in her town have so little time every day to do the things that they like that they need to invent 2 more hours every day just to be able to live a somewhat nice life. I applaud the effort. I applaud the thinking that, we want to try and create an environment where people can live their best life, but all it really did was inadvertently tell the rest of the world don't move to Vadsa because you will not have enough hours in the day to live a normal life.
Nah, there's not enough time.
Next up, zombies.
Zombies, zombies, zombies in the Arctic. Zombies, zombies, zombies in the Arctic.
Let's start with the most zombie thing to come out of the Arctic since Nazis. Outside of that incredible documentary, zombie viruses are absolutely a real thing. Yes, zombie viruses. We're finding them in permafrost land that is permanently frozen, and it has been frozen for in some cases up to 1 million years. Of course, global warming is doing its thing and melting the permafrost, releasing anything and everything that happened to be trapped under there at the time that it froze, including anything that the aliens may have put down in their freezer and just forgot about. That includes viruses, which have been asleep for 1 million years hibernating, and as soon as they're thawed, might just get about infecting anything and everything that shows up. Oh, just think about all the incredible things those viruses have missed while they've been asleep for 1 million years. Woolly mammoths disappeared. Giant sloths gone. 1 million years ago, Russia and the US were physically joined like the creepy twins from The Shining, and Britain and France were intertwined in such a close way that only a really poorly planned referendum could separate. And Florida came into existence. Imagine that. These viruses lived in a glorious world where Florida didn't exist. So viruses are coming into a new Arctic right as it is melting. You know what else is coming to the Arctic as it's melting? People. A whole lot of them. Oh boy, this is going to end well. People are drilling and digging and mining as the ice is retreating, and these viruses are waking up and just thinking, oh, I'd love to do a Prometheus on anyone that happens to walk by.
Hey, baby.
But are all these new viruses bad? Well, it seems like there's actually some viruses in Greenland that are really doing humans a solid. Only drawback, these are giant viruses. Giant viruses.
This is called the blob.
2 words you really wish weren't put together, like imminent insertion, immediate shrieking, moist pillow, or featuring Kanye. Thankfully, these viruses are only giant on the scale of viruses. There isn't an amorphous blob roaming around Greenland looking to murder someone like someone just introduced Flubber to Twitter. So while these viruses are actually about 200 times bigger than normal viruses, they are still microscopic. And they're doing humans a big favour. Much like when Usain Bolt first chased an ice cream truck, Greenland's name is coming true. You see, the Greenland ice sheet, which makes up the majority of Greenland, is normally basically a frozen desert. Nothing grows and nothing can survive there, like Albuquerque. But the climate in Greenland is changing, and Greenland is in fact greening. Algae is growing all over that ice sheet. This algae is absorbing sunlight hungrily, making these little pockets of warmth all over the Greenland ice sheet, making it melt even faster. Enter stage right, giant viruses. These helpful giant viruses, they're eating this algae, stopping it from growing out of control, and helping to slow down the melting of the Greenland ice sheet. If all this seems like a bit of a sci-fi horror to you, I've got great news. There's a sequel in the works. Russian villagers in the far northern region of Yakutia, that's apocalypse red flag number 1. This region is basically a mostly uninhabitable area of forests and swamps that's 95% frozen over, and has been frozen since the Ice Age. Red flag number 2. A few years ago, villagers from this region found a 44,000-year-old dead wolf that had been frozen in the permafrost, but this permafrost melted and let the dead wolf's corpse come to the surface. Red flag number 3. And this is the world's first ever discovery of a well-preserved late Pleistocene predator. Definitely red flag number 4. Local scientists are now performing an autopsy on this ancient, dead, extremely well-preserved, first of its kind predator. Get the red flags, just get the red flags out, get the red flags out. There's so many red flags, it's looking like another communist revolution in Russia. But there's something I would really like to ask these scientists. What killed this ancient predator, and what is now inside this ancient predator? Are these questions we really want answering? if it turns out that, say, the wolf was killed by ghost worms, and they are released as a result of this autopsy, infecting the world with ghost worms, and this causes a spiritual crisis in confirming that ghosts are real, they eat wolves, and they can be frozen? Well, you know what? That actually might just get everyone to cooperate in ending global warming to keep all the ghosts frozen. So, you know, I'm going to do a 180 on this. Go ahead. I no longer see any negatives possible as a result of this autopsy.
That's a perfect idea.
The Arctic has zombies, giant viruses, ancient predators, and a ton of red flags. Anything else? Mummies. Mothers? Mummies I'd like to freeze? Mummies with nuts? All of this is true. Get the zombies and the viruses and the wolves in here now.
I need backup assistance now! Now, goddammit, now!
Wait, no, it's okay. It's mummified walnuts. Huh, wait a minute. You can mummify walnuts? You're telling me I've been going all the way to Egypt to get over my mummy issues when I could have just been going to the local health store?
I'm a MILF.
So on the Canadian island of Axel Heiberg, which is basically as far north as it's possible to go on land, scientists looking around the island kept noticing something a bit weird. Stumps. Tree stumps dotted around the island. Which was definitely a bit confusing because the nearest trees that actually grow are about 3,000 miles away. It turns out the island is home to a massive fossilized rainforest, and it has preserved a kind of environment never before seen by humans.
I'm talking about a primitive world, never before seen by man.
Fossilization is a really interesting process. When we see fossils, typically we're watching a Jurassic Park film, or a child under 8 is proudly displaying their collection. When we see one of those fossils, we aren't looking at some perfectly preserved piece of plant or animal matter. What we're typically looking at is a piece of organic matter which has slowly been transformed into a mineral form, usually as a result of a sudden environmental change and the resulting heat and pressure. Easy example of things like that are things which died in a flash forest fire being preserved in a charcoal form. On Axel Heiberg, it's very, very different though. In this fossilized forest, scientists have found that the structure and the organic composition of the materials of the things which are being found around the island are completely unchanged. Wood, leaves, nuts, fruit, even from the forest, is being found in a perfectly preserved state on this island. So not only do they keep their structure for us to examine, their organic composition has remained the same. And the term for this is in fact mummification. You go, Forest Mummy.
You're the best mom ever!
That about covers all the weird headlines that I've come across in about the last year of working in Arctic journalism. I hope you've enjoyed. Maybe you've learned a thing or two, maybe you haven't, and that's fine. There's probably more things that I've missed, so definitely if you find a new story from the weird and wonderful world of the Arctic, do make sure to send it my way. Let me know if you've got any feedback about anything I've talked about or any future stories. Thank you for spending some of your time with me today. Stay safe, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye. Oh wait, polar bears are taking over research stations in the Arctic. Run! Run!